I saw Sienna Cross hurl my old leather suitcase into Meridian Lake and peel away so fast her tires carved a scream into the dirt. I was already moving before the dust settled, knees muttering about my age while my mind counted the seconds something inside that suitcase might not have. "Sienna!" I shouted, but the road swallowed her silver coupe like it had been waiting. The decision came as clean as a blade. I would reach that case or die trying. If you've ever had to walk toward the thing that could break you and do it anyway, please like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. You're not alone. I hit the shore awkwardly, skirt clinging to my calves, the handle of the suitcase just out of reach and sinking, like a hand loosening its grip from this world. "Not today," I said aloud, because I needed to hear someone answer the fear. The lake took me at the knees, the waist, then the ribs, mud dragging at my sandals, cold chewing through my resolve. I grabbed the strap and pulled. Whatever Sienna had sealed inside fought me with dead weight and a history I didn't yet know how to lift. The zipper teeth were slick and obstinate. I braced my thumb against the brass pull and wrenched until the fabric burned my knuckles. The lid gave half an inch, then more. A muffled sound rose from the dark with the stubbornness of a heartbeat refusing orders. I ripped the case open and found the Unthinkable spread in blue. A newborn, skin wax pale, lips plum dark, umbilical cord tied with string as careless as a lie. For a second, I was stone. Then I gathered him and the world unpaused. "Breathe, little one," I whispered, because my son Daniel had taught me that even fear listens when you make it a request. The baby's chest flickered, barely. I angled his head, cleared his mouth with a finger, and tucked him against my blouse like I was smuggling hope. The cool porcelain rim of my dropped mug lay shattered on the porch behind me, and I felt the sting of wet clay grit on my palm as I ran. Inside, the old kitchen clock banged its truth into the room. 5:19, and I dialed with shaking hands. 911, the operator said, voice steady as a metronome. "Found a newborn, hypothermic, purple lips. Pulled from Meridian Lake. My address is 412 Shore," I said, words tripping over each other like they were late. "Dry, wrap, no rubbing," she instructed, and I moved as if I'd trained for this, stripping towels from the oven bar, patting, tucking, breathing for both of us. When he stirred, a small, ragged sound like a match trying to catch, my heart lurched toward gratitude. If I'd looked only a minute later, would I be holding a quiet instead of a child? I am 62 and too familiar with rooms where people avert their eyes from older women like we're soft furniture, useful, forgettable. But some afternoons pick you up by the collar and say, "Choose." The thought came sharp and simple. If he lived, he would not be a roomer who washed up on my life. He would be my boundary. That clarity scared me more than the lake did. I pressed my cheek to his forehead to feel any heat it could spare me. I whispered my name to him. "I'm Miriam. I'm here." And he answered with a thin, stubborn breath that sounded like consent. The siren arrived as a promise you could hear before you believed it. 2 paramedics took the tiny bundle with practiced hands, oxygen mask a saucer across his face, electrodes like little moons dotting his chest. "Severe hypothermia," the woman said, already moving. "You're riding!" I climbed into the back, fingers pinched white around a rail to keep from grabbing him again. The rig jolted forward. "How'd you find him?" she asked. "Sienna," I said, the word tasting metallic. "My daughter-in-law." Her eyes flicked up, the way a person checks a door they thought they'd locked. I said Sienna's name again so it would exist outside me. Sienna, who married my son, who cried well at Daniel's funeral 6 months ago, who bought gray dresses that looked innocent under dim light. Sienna, who watched him die on a wet road the coroner called accident and my bones called something else. My mind rummaged for reasons she'd throw a suitcase into a lake. Despair? Shame? Rage? Money? The guesses felt indecent but necessary. "Stay with me," the paramedic said, and I realized I'd stopped breathing with the baby. I forced air in until the rush scraped my lip raw. At County General, doors flung open like the world was finally cooperating. Neonatology swallowed him behind double glass. They told me to wait, and I did, because waiting is the oldest work assigned to women like me. The waiting room chairs were plastic and indifferent. The vending machine hummed like it wanted to sell me comfort. I clenched my hands until the grit of lake sand under my nails pressed thin crescents into my palms. A nurse with kind eyes approached and sat without the pity that makes you smaller. "I'm Rosa," she said. "You did good." I nodded because any other movement would break me. A detective arrived with a folder like news comes wearing paperwork. "Lieutenant Nora Alvarez," she said, voice precise, ponytail severe enough to be a posture. I told her what I saw, twice, then a third time with the distance from my porch to the water measured in breaths. "Color of the car?" she asked. "Silver," I said. "Model?" "Coupe." "Time?" 5:15 when I spilled my tea. She wrote like she trusted the pen more than people. "Relationship?" "She married my son." "Is your son here?" "He's not anywhere," I said, and watched the sentence land. They left me with silence again, and I let the quiet ask its single question. What part of me believed I had misseen Sienna because believing made survival easier? The answer arrived without kindness. None of me. Grief is a blunt tool, but it does not invent coops at lake edges or blue blankets tied with string. I pressed my fingers to my temple and felt the throb insist on sleep I wouldn't take. A small prayer I didn't remember memorizing unspooled itself and sat beside me like an old friend who had always knocked before entering. I carried Daniel's memory like a brass key I keep in my pocket. Cool, useful, and with the weight to remind me I own some doors. When he was little, he'd nap on my chest, trusting me to be the ground. Later, when he told me he'd found the kind of love that made him plan, he sounded like a man who'd learned how clocks can be allies if you use them right. Then the wet road took him. The report said loss of control, but I never learned how to stop picturing hands that didn't belong under that hood. Everyone called me dramatic when I asked for the car to be looked at again. "Miriam," they said, "let time do its work." Time does work. It just doesn't always work for you. A young doctor with tired eyes finally called my name. "He's alive," he said. "Critical, but responsive to warming and oxygen. We'll know more in the next 48 hours. I told him I'd sit there 48 days if that's what he needed. He smiled in the way doctors do when they've learned hope is a currency they're allowed to spend carefully. "Do you know the mother?" he asked. "I think I do," I said, "and I think she doesn't deserve the word." He didn't write that down. Rosa brought me a blanket that smelled faintly of lemon, like someone had cleaned a life I might borrow for a while. I wrapped it around my shoulders and sat straighter. "You should rest," she said. "Not until I see him," I replied, and she measured my answer like a nurse measures a pulse, checking for rhythm, not poetry. "We'll try," she said, and left to ask the rules for bending. A social worker named Keisha appeared with a tablet full of protocols. "We need to talk about placement if he survives," she said gently, "and mandated reports, and temporary custody." The words, "if he survives," clipped something inside me, but I swallowed the blood and spoke anyway. "He does," I said. "He will." She nodded because people in her job learn to let declarations stand until reality contradicts them. "Do you have family who can support you?" she asked. "Not the kind I can call," I answered, and the room understood without commentary. Lieutenant Alvarez returned with a new edge to her voice. "We checked the supermarket camera on South Shore," she said. "Sienna's car pinged at 5:20, 3 miles away." I felt the floor slide half an inch under me. "You saying I'm wrong?" I asked. "I'm saying we'll need to prove you're right," she replied, like someone who respects truth enough to chase it on foot. "Can we talk to Sienna?" "If you can find her," I said. "She'll have changed something. Hair, story, or both." The detective's mouth tightened. "We'll look," she promised, and left me another card I didn't want to need. I stood and walked to the glass of the NICU doors as if proximity could be a petition. A nurse adjusted a tube. Another recorded numbers, both moving with the soft urgency of people who carry tiny fires through wind. Beyond them, a blue-wrapped body lay inside a plastic world, fighting with a quiet that felt louder than any machine. I placed my palm on the glass and felt only the cool fact of barrier. "Hold on," I whispered, and the words fogged nothing, but they steadied me. Reflection. Age has taught me which battles waste time and which demand it. Invisibility is useful until you need to be seen. Survival isn't loud. It's a small decision renewed every minute by someone who refuses to stop choosing. Why did Sienna think water could keep a secret better than I could keep a promise? I didn't cry when they finally let me in to touch his hand. I just counted the seconds between his breaths and filed them like evidence, because tomorrow I'd need to prove what I pulled from that lake was mine to protect. And because somewhere, a door I hadn't found yet was waiting to be opened with a key I already carried. I didn't sit. I walked the hallway until the linoleum learned my stride, because stillness felt too much like surrender. Rosa cracked the NICU door and lifted a hand. "Wait," then crossed to me with the same calm people use to hold a teacup in a moving car. "We got his temperature up a notch," she said. "You can stand by the isolette for 5 minutes." 5 minutes sounded like a kingdom. I washed, gowned, and went in, every movement deliberate, because gravity seemed heavier around a child who had already fallen once. His chest rose like a small argument with the universe. I counted and matched my breathing to his. "Miriam," Rosa murmured, "talk to him." So I did. "You're not a secret," I said. "You're a fact that survives." Lieutenant Alvarez met me outside the glass with a measured look that said she wished she was delivering good news. "We canvassed the shore," she began, flipping her folder open. "Tire tracks, yes, but no clear plate impressions, and the mud is a mess of footprints." I swallowed. I was wearing sandals. "We saw." She drew a breath. "We also pulled footage from the gas station 2 blocks up. A silver coupe matching your description passed at 5:09 toward the lake. That helps." Her voice softened half a note. "It doesn't prove who was driving." "Find the driver," I said. "Start with Sienna's face." It wasn't courage. It was irritation at the idea that truth should have to wait its turn. Keisha appeared again, tablet tucked like a shield. "Mandated report is filed," she said. "Until we identify a mother, the state stands in loco parentis." I stared at the door that separated me from the baby who had breathed against my blouse and felt a contrary heat in my chest. "He came out of a suitcase I own," I said, and watched the social worker brace. "I understand," she replied, and to her credit, she didn't explain policy twice. "If you choose to pursue temporary kinship care, you'll start paperwork today." She slid a packet into my hands, thick enough to be a second job. "Background check, home visit, references, basic infant safety course." "I raised a boy," I said. "Do I get credit?" "In my heart," she said, almost smiling. "On paper, no." Decision beat. I tucked the packet under my arm. "Then we start now." Rosa brought me a pen, which felt like luck pretending to be office supply. I filled boxes with answers no one would read twice. Widowed, retired school secretary, no criminal record, income from a pension that looks shy beside a grocery list. Under household hazards, I wrote honestly. Old stairs, loose porch rail, a front door lock that sticks unless you know its trick. I did not write that grief can make time viscous, or that nights in my house sound like a man coughing in another room until you remember he's dead. "References?" Keisha prompted. "Pastor Bennett," I said, "and my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who knows when I'm sick before I do." She typed, and I heard keys talk like clear rain. The hospital priest came, collar pale against his jacket, eyes kind enough to let me refuse comfort without penalty. "You want prayer?" he asked. "I want proof," I answered. He nodded as if those were cousins. "Proof arrives in the company of patience," he said. "May I sit?" We did the quiet thing believers and doubters do in the same chair. We shared air. After a minute, he added, "When my mother aged, she said invisibility was a cloak until it was a cage." I breathed that in. "Mine has holes," I replied. "I can see out. They can't see in." He smiled like an old map finding a remembered road. Alvarez returned, phone to her ear, shoulders squaring before she spoke. We have an update, she said. A supermarket camera caught Sienna's coupe at 5:20, leaving the plaza in the opposite direction of the lake. Her eyes asked if I would bend. Someone could drive her car, I said. Wigs exist. Faces change. We're not discounting your account, she replied. We're building a frame around it. Anger nudged me, then moved aside for precision. Then widen it, I told her. Check the bait shop camera. The owner tapes everything because he thinks people pocket lead weights. Alvarez's mouth tipped. Name? Earl, I said. Sells night crawlers like they're medicine. Tell him Miriam sent you. He'll feel 9 feet tall. Decision beat. The lieutenant texted an officer on the spot. We're on it, she said, and I chose to believe her. I called Pastor Bennett and asked for a letter that said I am not the kind of woman who loses interest. 2 hours later, he handed Keisha 3 paragraphs about casseroles delivered during blizzards, and the time I organized a church roof repair by threatening to bake if men wouldn't climb ladders. You bullied me with pie, he told me in front of her, which made Keisha laugh and kept me human on a form that wanted boxes more than breath. Mrs. Chen, reached through the wall by knock and habit, wrote a line in careful script. Miriam hears a baby's cry like a smoke alarm. That sentence felt truer than my birth certificate. The sensory world insisted on its right to exist. Antiseptic tang cut the air as a janitor swabbed a peel of floor to shine. I realized I was thirsty and bought a paper cup of water just to feel trust go down and stay. The cup warmed in my palm. My palm cooled. Small trade, fair. By late afternoon, fatigue made my hand clumsy and my thoughts sharp. Alvarez's partner, a younger detective with a notebook that seemed too clean, asked for a statement one more time. Use my words, I told him, not the ones you think fit better. He nodded and printed in block letters like a man trying not to betray anyone with cursive. Why do you think Sienna would do this? He asked. The question landed without feathers. Because she prefers checks to people, I answered, then winced because bitterness tastes worse when you hear yourself sip it. And because when my son died, she cried for herself. Motive is useful, he said, writing the word like a nail. At dusk, Rosa let me stand again at the isolette. I thought of the suitcase. My suitcase, an old gift to Sienna, brass zipper that always stuck unless you held it at an angle, the angle I had used. A detail means a memory is telling the truth. I touched the infant's hand with a gloved finger and watched those tiny fingers try to argue with mine, then curl in compromise. You stubborn thing, I said, awe rising like heat. That's a family trait. His monitor beeped in a rhythm that felt like a metronome teaching me a new piece. Reflection. I have lived long enough to know the cost of caring and the cost of pretending not to. The second bill always arrives later with interest. I do not want a gentle life if it asks me to be a gentle liar. What name do you give a child who arrives in your arms without permission, but with purpose? I stepped back, scrubbed out, and felt the brass key in my pocket nick my knuckle as if to remind me that doors are made to move. Keisha hovered with the last form and a date for the home visit. Tomorrow, 9, she said. Be yourself. I plan to be, I answered, and put my palm on the NICU glass one more time before I left, holding still long enough to see my own reflection and wonder who exactly I would need to become by morning. Morning broke thin and gray, the kind that forgets to bring warmth. I swept the porch because movement steadied thought. The brass key in my pocket tapped against my thigh each time I bent, my reminder that I could still open what others locked. By 9 sharp, the state car rolled up. Keisha and a new woman with a clipboard stepped out, shoes spotless, eyes alert for evidence of imperfection. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, Keisha said. We'll make this quick. Her tone was kind. The clipboard's wasn't. Inside, the smell of lemon oil lingered from last night's cleaning. I'd wiped every surface until my shoulder ached, as if polish could testify. The inspector noted smoke detectors, checked window latches, ran a hand along the stair rail I'd tightened at dawn. Any firearms in the house? She asked. Only kitchen knives with dull edges, I replied. Humor didn't register. She scribbled. I offered tea. Both declined. Decision beat. I made tea anyway. If I was to be judged, I'd serve civility with it. Keisha asked about routine. You live alone? Yes. Support network? Neighbors? Church? Financial stability? Enough to feed one small miracle. She smiled, barely. The clipboard woman didn't. What would you do in an emergency? Call the same people who came when a baby was sinking in a lake, I said. My voice surprised me. Firmer than I intended, but I let it stand. The inspector looked up, pencil paused, and nodded once before moving on. When they left, the quiet came back heavier. I sat at Daniel's old desk and unfolded the form's carbon copy. Pending approval, follow-up inspection within 7 days. I placed it beneath his photograph, 28, smiling in a suit he hated. The air smelled faintly of his aftershave, still clinging to the wood grain. I closed my eyes, not to cry, but to listen. Grief has a sound, like breath against glass, constant, asking to be let in. At noon, the phone rang. Miriam? Rosa's voice carried good news like it was afraid of breaking. He's holding his temperature. Breathing on his own. My knees nearly gave. Can I see him? Come after visiting hours end. The charge nurse owes me a favor. Another decision beat. I drove, ignoring the posted limits, because Mercy rarely keeps office hours. The drive around Meridian Lake cut through memory. The water was calm now, mirror flat, pretending innocence. I parked near the spot where mud still bore my half-prints. A police buoy floated farther out, orange against the pale. I thought of Sienna, her gray dress, her impossible composure, and felt a tremor of rage I didn't try to tame. Aging has its perks. One of them is the right to stop apologizing for your anger. At the hospital, nightlights hummed low. Rosa met me by the staff elevator, finger pressed to her lips. We slipped into the NICU through the back. 5 minutes, she said. The baby, my foundling, was unhooked from half the machines, wrapped in clean cotton. His eyelids fluttered, lashes dark as Daniel's. I rested a fingertip on his wrist. The pulse there was steady, insisting on a future. You're stubborn like your father, I whispered. Rosa watched quietly. Even she sensed something unnamed had crossed between us. I asked if they'd found Sienna. Rosa shook her head. The detective stopped by earlier. No new leads. I tried to picture Sienna hiding, but she'd never been good at blending. Money liked attention, so did she. Maybe that was why she was dangerous. She knew how to make cruelty look like composure. The nurse laid a form on the counter. They need a provisional name for the records, she said. I hesitated. Daniel once said if he had a boy, he'd name him Eli, I murmured. Then Eli it is. The nurse wrote it down. Seeing the name printed made it real, like carving initials into time. Reflection. The older you get, the fewer things feel new, yet the ones that do carve deeper. I didn't realize how much of me had gone numb until one cry woke every nerve. I think that's what survival means, remembering sensation. What kind of world teaches a mother to throw away her own child? Driving home, I caught sight of the brass key gleaming on the passenger seat where I'd dropped it. Daniel's house key, still attached to the ring from his first apartment. I rolled it between my fingers, thinking how doors outlive the people who lock them. The porch light I'd left burning threw my shadow tall across the steps. For a second, it looked like someone waiting inside. I didn't flinch. I turned the key in the stiff lock, felt the click, and thought, let the next door I open be his. In the kitchen, the lemon scent had faded into something closer to calm. I brewed chamomile and stood by the window, watching the lake lights flicker, distant and small. A cruiser moved along the far road, probably Alvarez, still chasing what was already half legend. I hoped she was patient. Evil wears disguises that age as well as people do. I signed the next form Keisha had left. Intent to apply for temporary custody. My handwriting shook on the line but stayed legible. Beneath it, I wrote a single note to myself. Find the truth before it finds you. Outside, wind brushed the porch chimes Daniel had hung years ago. The sound was thin, persistent. A voice insisting that unfinished things still call our names. I leaned against the doorframe, tea warm between my palms, and whispered to the night. I'm listening. Then I went inside, shut off the light, and left the key on the table where morning could find it. By morning, the paperwork had multiplied like stubborn weeds, but I didn't wait for anyone to bless my resolve. I put the custody packet in a canvas tote, slipped Daniel's brass key into my pocket, and drove straight to the courthouse, because sometimes the fastest way to be seen is to stand where seeing is required. Security waved me through after a bag check. Inside, the clerk's window looked like a confessional for people who needed stamps more than absolution. "Temporary kinship petition," I said. The woman behind the glass didn't look up from her screen. "Form 17B, affidavit, proof of residence, 2 references, fingerprint voucher." I slid everything through the slot. "And a hearing date," I added. She tapped, frowned, then printed. "Judge Halprin, next Thursday at 10. Decision beat. "Make it sooner," I said. "A newborn's involved." She eyed me, recalculated, and scratched a note. "If a slot opens, we'll call." On the steps, my phone buzzed. Lieutenant Alvarez. "We pulled the bait shop footage," she said. "Your hunch was good." I braced. "What did you see?" "The coupe near the lake at 5:11. Driver wore a cap and mask." "Height?" "Close to Sienna's. Could be her, could be a cousin." "She doesn't have cousins," I snapped, then softened. "She collects acquaintances the way other people collect receipts." Alvarez let that sit. "We also visited her apartment," she added. "Gone. Closet stripped, trash clean, digital footprints cold." "She planned," I said. "Months, maybe." "If so, she left a seam somewhere," Alvarez replied. "I'll find it." I drove to my bank. The manager, a careful man who liked rules until they liked him back, met me in his frosted glass office. "Miss Carter," he began, "what can we do for you today?" "I need copies of any beneficiary changes Daniel made in the last year," I said. He cleared his throat. "We can't disclose client records without—" "He was my son," I said, and the bluntness made him blink. "He's deceased," he countered gently. "Then show me the estate file," I pressed. He hesitated, then turned to his screen. "There was a change, 3 weeks before the accident," he said at last. "Life insurance beneficiary moved from spouse to issue, with trust language." "Trust, not wife." "Print it," I said. Progress beat. He did. Outside, Keisha's number flashed. "Home study prelim passed," she said. "Second inspection Wednesday." "What's the fastest I can get cleared to bring him home?" I asked. "If the judge signs temporary custody, same day," she said. "Keep your phone close." "It sleeps next to me," I replied. She exhaled, then added, "There's pushback about your age." "I'm countering with your support letters and the fact you saved his life." "You say age like it's a weakness," I said. "I say it's a technology." She laughed, quick and real. "Copying that line," she said, and hung up. At County General, Rosa met me with eyes brighter than yesterday's. "He took 3 ounces," she said, holding up fingers like a coach calling plays. "Woke twice and fussed like he meant it." She let me scrub in. "We'll start skin to skin when the doc clears you." The phrase pulled a memory of Daniel. A rubber duck, suds, the way he'd fall asleep on my chest while the bathwater cooled and the day did too. "Has he been assigned a case name?" I asked. "Eli Carter," Rosa said. She'd taken my suggestion and made it official. Hearing it aloud steadied something in me I hadn't known was trembling. Keisha arrived with a gray-suited attorney in tow. "Miss Carter, this is Jonathan Pike from Legal Aid," she said. He offered a card and a dry handshake. "We'll help you file for emergency custody if the investigation points where you say it does," he said. "Meanwhile, don't contact Miss Cross." "I don't call ghosts," I replied. "Good," he said. "Ghosts sometimes answer." He asked for a brief timeline. I gave him one stripped of decoration. He liked that. "One more thing," he said. "Expect Sienna to claim postpartum crisis or coercion if she's cornered." "She rehearses remorse," I said. "She won't feel it." He nodded, like a man who has met that kind of woman before and didn't enjoy the meeting. In the NICU alcove, a volunteer wheeled in a cart with knit caps and soft blankets. "For our fighters," she said. She held up a tiny blue cap shot through with a single white stripe. "This one looks right." I almost said yes. Then I saw the blanket printed with sailboats and wind. Not today, I thought. Water had taken enough from us already. "Plain cotton, please," I said. The volunteer gave me a look that understood boundaries disguised as preferences. "Plain it is." The sensory detail came out of nowhere. The paper cup they gave me at the nurse's station pressed cool against my lip, and the water's clean taste cut through the metal tang of worry. I swallowed, and the simple fact of swallowing reminded me that bodies like mine keep showing up for work whether we are thanked or not. Alvarez texted, "Need you at the station. Found something in the crash file." I texted back, 10 minutes. To Rosa, I said, "I'll be back." She touched my shoulder, the gentlest permission. At the precinct, Alvarez had the photos laid out like a funeral without flowers. "Original report called it hydroplaning," she said, but the tow yard still had the car. She flipped to a close-up. "Brake line shows tool marks." I felt heat rise up my spine. "So he didn't just slide," I said. "Someone greased the slope." "We're not saying that. Yet." Her caution was a kindness to the case, not to me. "We'll need corroboration," she added. "Mechanic logs, surveillance near his garage, bank transfers." "Start with Sienna's Venmo," I said. "She thinks cash apps are invisible if she sets the privacy to friends." Alvarez smiled without softness. "Already subpoenaed." I went home to meet Mrs. Chen, who marched in carrying a casserole and a stapled list of things she had already done for me because she knows I forget to ask. "I called my cousin at the comptroller's," she said. "He pulled property records. Sienna doesn't own, she rents, and her last landlord wrote, 'No problems, paid early.' That's a problem." "Why?" "People who pay early are hiding late somewhere else." She set the dish on the counter, then lowered her voice. "You have a spare bed? If you need an extra person when the inspector returns, I can sleep here 3 nights a week." Decision beat. "Bring your toothbrush," I said, "and the loud robe your mother hated." She grinned. "You'll get better results with a rope that offends." At midnight, when the house had settled into its old bones, I sat at Daniel's desk and wrote a letter to the judge. Not the kind you file, the kind you fold and keep. I listed what I could promise. That I would wake before dawn without complaint, learn new medicines without pride, and build a life measured in ounces and naps. I did not write that I am afraid of failing a child who already beat the odds. I did not write that sometimes I believe Daniel died because I raised him to be gentle in a world that prizes sharper things. Reflection. Age brings a clarity that refuses bargain. Either I say what the day requires, or I stop pretending the day will forgive me. I will not ask the day for permission again. Around 2, the phone lit the dark. A blocked number. I answered anyway. "Miriam," a voice breathed. "Sienna." She didn't bother with preface. "You have something of mine." "I have someone," I corrected. "He isn't property." "Bring him to Meridian Warehouse tomorrow at midnight," she said. "And I won't make you watch what comes next." I kept my tone flat to hide the thud in my chest. "You tried to drown a child with my suitcase, and my son's blood still wet on your shoes," I said. "You have no leverage." "I have youth," she said, an edge of laugh in it. "And people prefer it when pretty women cry." "I prefer it when liars run out of breath," I replied. "Wear shoes you can sprint in." I hung up and immediately texted the time and place to Alvarez. Wire, Teams, snipers if you're feeling theatrical. She responded in seconds. "We'll stage quiet. Don't deviate." I placed the receiver down, then stood at the window and watched the lake hold the moon like a body keeps a secret. What would I be if I let fear write him out of my life? I turned from the glass and set 3 things on the table in a line. Daniel's photo, the custody petition, and the brass key. So I could see past, future, and the tool that lets you walk between them. Then I picked up the phone to call Rosa, because someone had to hold Eli who wasn't me while I walked into whatever waited in that warehouse. And when the line clicked to voicemail, I left only this: keep him warm. Keep him close. I'm coming back with less of the past and more room for him. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep requires trust, and mine had been exhausted. By dawn, I'd brewed enough coffee to float a boat and packed my tote like a soldier preparing for trial instead of battle. Daniel's key, a small flashlight, my rosary, though I hadn't prayed in years, and a folded note for Alvarez in case things didn't go the way plans pretend they will. I left it on the counter beside Mrs. Chen's casserole, still untouched. Decision beat. I would go alone, but not unprotected. At 9, Alvarez called. "We'll have 2 unmarked cars near the warehouse perimeter," she said. "You'll drive your car. Stay wired." "If she shows, we move." "If she doesn't?" I asked. "Then we keep hunting," she replied. Her tone was the calm of someone who'd made peace with risk. "Do not improvise, Miriam." "I'm too old to improvise," I lied. She didn't laugh. All day the house felt like it was holding its breath. Mrs. Chen brought over dumplings and fussed, saying she could sit up by the window as lookout. "Not tonight," I told her. "If I don't come back, call Alvarez, not ghosts." She crossed her arms. "You underestimate old women," she said. "We're excellent witnesses." I kissed her cheek anyway. "Exactly why you're staying safe." Evening thickened early. I drove once around the block, habit from the days when Daniel was 16, and sneaking out to parties I pretended not to know about. Every streetlight felt like a question I didn't want to answer. The brass key weighed heavy in my pocket, its edges pressing my thigh through the fabric like a reminder of intent. The sound of it against the steering column was the only rhythm steady enough to keep me from shaking. At 11:47, I parked 3 blocks from Meridian Warehouse, an old storage facility by the tracks, half its letters burned out, the kind of place that collects stories and dust in equal measure. A freight train rolled by, scattering sparks as it passed. I could smell rust and oil. Sensory detail, the faint sweetness of gasoline hung in the air, layered over mildew, as if the building itself had been exhaling secrets. I whispered to no one, "Stay small, stay steady," and tucked the wire under my blouse. Alvarez's voice crackled once in my ear. "We've got eyes." Midnight came quiet, then headlights sliced the dark. Sienna's silver coupe, door slamming shut with expensive precision. She wore black, hair pulled tight, confidence like perfume. "You look tired, Miriam," she said, voice as light as ever. "Saving lives doesn't suit everyone." "Killing them doesn't either," I replied. She laughed, a sound that made the air colder. "You think you're the hero?" "You were never even invited to the story." I took a step closer. "Then why does it end with me?" She smiled the way people do when they believe a trick is unfolding exactly to plan. "I needed that baby gone," she said softly. "He wasn't mine." Not Daniel's either. A mess I didn't ask for. My throat went dry. "You mean you—" "Don't moralize," she snapped. "You've had your turn. I made sure Daniel wouldn't embarrass me anymore." She said it so casually the words landed like ice. I wanted to hit her, but rage can be too noisy. Instead, I asked the question that had been circling since the lake. "Why use my suitcase?" "Because you'd see it," she said, smirking. "Because you'd come." And you did. For a moment, the world narrowed to the space between her pulse and my patience. I noticed movement in the shadows. Alvarez's silhouette, silent, waiting. I just had to keep her talking. "You staged your husband's accident," I said evenly. "Slipped money to a mechanic, changed the brakes." Her eyes widened, not in guilt, but pride. "He should have taken the hint when I said no kids." "And yet, here you are, bargaining with one you tried to drown." "Oh, Miriam," she purred, "always the martyr." "Let me guess, you've already named him, haven't you?" "Eli," I said, steady, "and he'll never carry your name." The warehouse light flickered once, then twice. The signal. Alvarez moved in with her team, quiet as breath. "Sienna Cross," Alvarez said, badge flashing. "You're under arrest for attempted murder, obstruction, and—" Sienna spun, a gun appearing from her coat faster than thought. Reflex took over. I grabbed the nearest thing, a length of iron pipe, and swung. The clang was deafening. The gun clattered across the floor. Alvarez's partner lunged, tackling her down. For a heartbeat, all sound froze but my own breath. When the echo died, Alvarez looked at me with a mix of relief and reprimand. "You were supposed to stay still," she said. "Old habits," I replied, shaking. The brass key had fallen from my pocket. I bent and picked it up. Its edge was wet, not with blood, but condensation from the cold. I turned it once in my hand, grounding myself. They cuffed Sienna, reading her rights as she hissed curses like broken glass. She caught my eye. "You think you win?" she spat. "He's still not yours." "No," I said quietly. "He's no one's property. That's what makes him free." Alvarez pulled her away. Her laughter trailed off into the dark. Reflection. I've learned that justice doesn't come wrapped in applause. It arrives limping, carrying the cost of survival on its back. Age doesn't dull the blade. It teaches you where to cut. How many times must a woman be erased before she learns to write her own proof back into the world? Back home, dawn pressed pale against the windows. I laid the brass key on the kitchen table beside the custody papers and the now cold coffee. The house smelled of lemon oil and smoke from the heating vent, life and afterlife intertwined. I whispered to the silence, "It's done," though part of me knew nothing ever truly is. Then I exhaled, and for the first time in years, it sounded like starting over. The news broke before sunrise. I woke to the radio murmuring from the kitchen. Local woman arrested in connection with the Meridian Lake case, and the sound of my own heartbeat catching up to the sentence. They didn't use names yet, just details that made Sienna unmistakable. 34, recent widow, suspected of orchestrating husband's fatal accident. I turned off the radio before they could call her beautiful but troubled. Beauty was her disguise. Trouble was the only honest part. I drove straight to County General, sunlight still pale and indecisive. Rosa met me by the nurse's station, hair pulled back, eyes full of the night's vigil. "You did it, didn't you?" she said softly. "She's in custody." "We did it," I corrected. "You kept him alive long enough for the truth to matter." She led me through the hall, past rooms full of tiny battlers. Eli's crib stood by the window, the soft hum of the warmer surrounding him like a lullaby that refused to quit. "He's breathing on his own now," Rosa whispered. I placed a hand on the plastic cover, and the world narrowed to that rhythm. Inhale, exhale, future. Keisha arrived an hour later with fresh paperwork and the calm energy of someone who'd fought bureaucracy and won. "Judge Halprin signed the emergency custody order at 7, she said, handing me the stamped form. "You can take him home as soon as the discharge clears." The words didn't register at first. I just stared at the official seal, that small golden sun declaring something irrevocable. Decision beat. "I'll prepare his room today," I said, and my voice shook only once. They gave me a diaper bag, formula samples, and a car seat that looked like an engineering marvel designed by angels. Rosa walked me out, her hand on my arm. "He's stronger than he looks," she said. "So are you." The morning air smelled of rain on asphalt, metal, and renewal. I buckled Eli in, every click deliberate, then sat behind the wheel, unsure how to move when every motion suddenly meant forever. Halfway home, traffic stalled at the courthouse. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust like weapons. Alvarez's voice played on the noon update. "Evidence indicates deliberate tampering with the victim's vehicle. The infant is safe under protective custody." They didn't name me, thank God. I didn't want fame. I wanted peace. At home, Mrs. Chen had already transformed my spare room. Fresh sheets, a mobile with paper cranes, a rocking chair she'd borrowed from her niece. "Babies need color," she declared, waving a pastel blanket like a flag. I held Eli against my chest, his warmth steady and astonishing. He opened his eyes, gray-blue, uncertain, searching. "Welcome home," I whispered. The words landed heavy with promise. Later, Alvarez stopped by, trenchcoat damp from the drizzle. "She confessed," she said, voice low. Said she panicked after the baby came early, hid it, blamed Daniel's weakness. She's trying for insanity. I met her eyes. She's always been sane enough to calculate. Alvarez nodded. The DA will see it that way. She paused, softer. "You saved 2 lives, his and your own." "I didn't do it to be saved," I said. "I did it because silence felt like dying twice." She smiled faintly. "Either way, the system owes you." "Tell it to send diapers," I said, and she laughed for the first time since we met. That night, the house felt alive again. The clock ticked steady. The scent of formula mingled with lemon oil, and I realized how ordinary miracles smell. Warm milk and polish, not thunder or roses. I sat in the rocker with Eli asleep against me, the brass key resting on the windowsill where moonlight found it. Reflection. Every generation thinks endurance is new. It isn't. It's the inheritance women pass down when the world forgets our names. I used to think my purpose ended with Daniel. I was wrong. Life is more reckless with its gifts. It hands you another when you least deserve one. What do you call this feeling when pain finally lets you breathe without asking permission? Outside, the lake was still, moonlight silvering its skin as if to erase the night it betrayed us. I looked at Eli's tiny fingers, the soft pulse beneath his skin, and understood that redemption doesn't come as apology. It comes as continuation. I stood, laid him gently in his crib, and whispered, "You are free from what came before." The brass key caught a glint of light. I picked it up, turned it once in my palm, and knew it would open more than just a door now. It would open whatever future we chose to unlock. Eli's first week at home passed like living inside a whisper. Every sound smaller, every heartbeat louder. I moved through the house on instinct. Feed, change, watch, breathe. Sleep came in brief, truce-like intervals. But I didn't complain. After years of waking to nothing but silence, this kind of noise felt like purpose. The social worker's second visit came sooner than expected. Keisha stood at the door with a clipboard and an exhaustion only women who care for strangers know. "Surprise inspection," she said. "Don't panic." "If I panic, the baby sleeps better," I said. She smiled, writing that down as if it might help someone else someday. She checked the outlets, the crib spacing, the formula expiration dates. "Everything looks good," she said. "The file will close pending the hearing next month." Decision beat. I reached for the envelope on the counter. "I've been adding to his trust," I said. "Daniel's insurance cleared. I want to make sure Eli never has to beg for a beginning." Keisha nodded, professional but moved. "You're building stability faster than most families," she said. "Don't forget yourself in the process." "Too late for that," I said quietly, and she didn't push. When she left, Mrs. Chen came by with soup, shaking her head. "The reporters are still circling the courthouse," she said. "They always want to turn tragedy into prime time." "Let them chase noise," I replied. "We'll keep the quiet." She ladled broth into bowls, steam rising like mercy. The smell, ginger and chicken, warmed the corners of the house that grief hadn't touched in years. At sunset, Alvarez called. "The DA wants you to testify," she said. "Preliminary hearing next week." My stomach tightened. "Do I have to?" "Yes," she said. "Your statement closes the loop." I glanced at Eli asleep in his crib, his hand curled like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. "Then I'll be there," I said, "but I won't look at her." "You don't have to," Alvarez replied. "She'll be looking at the floor." The next morning, I dressed in the same navy dress I wore to Daniel's graduation, the one that still carried the faint scent of his cologne if I imagined hard enough. The courthouse corridors echoed with shoes and tension. I took the stand, raised my hand, swore the oath. Sienna sat at the defense table, wrist cuffed, hair dull under the fluorescent lights. She didn't meet my eyes. The prosecutor asked me to describe the night at the lake. I did, word by word, each memory a stone laid carefully on water. I didn't embellish. Truth doesn't need decoration. When they asked if I believed Sienna intended to kill the child, I said, I believe she intended silence. The room went still. Even the judge looked up. Sienna flinched, not at the accusation, but at the recognition. Afterward, Alvarez met me in the hallway. You handled that perfectly, she said. Calm, factual, devastating. I've had practice being ignored, I said. Turns out it makes you good at being heard when it counts. Back home, Eli stirred as I walked in. I lifted him from the crib, his cheek warm against my neck. The house creaked softly, the sound of old wood remembering it's still alive. Reflection. People think motherhood ends when your children do, but it doesn't. It just changes shape, finding whoever still needs saving. Age doesn't take that away. It only makes the love more deliberate. Why do the hardest goodbyes sound so much like breathing? I carried him to the porch, where the air smelled faintly of rain and lemon oil. The brass key glinted on the table beside my cup of tea. I reached for it, turned it over once between my fingers. Daniel's key, now Eli's inheritance. Not for a house, but for a life that wouldn't repeat our mistakes. I slipped it onto a chain and placed it around my neck. You'll get this when you can walk, I whispered. When you can choose what doors to open. The night settled soft around us. Across the lake, faint lights from the bait shop still flickered. Earl never closed early. I smiled, knowing some people keep watch even when they don't have to. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth, and I thought of how easily the past sinks, how stubbornly it resurfaces. Eli's tiny sigh brushed my collarbone. I rocked him once, twice, until the rhythm of his breath matched mine. Then I whispered, We're almost through the storm, little one. The rest is learning how to live in the calm. The trial came faster than I was ready for. One morning, I found the summons taped to my front door, damp from dew, my name written in ink that had started to run, like the system was already crying for what it might put me through. Inside the envelope was a date, a courtroom, and a reminder to dress appropriately. I almost laughed. After 62 years of carrying this body through grief, toil, and motherhood, how else was I supposed to dress but appropriately? I spent that week rehearsing nothing. When truth lives inside your bones, it doesn't need lines. I woke before dawn, fed Eli, watched the light crawl across the nursery wall. His eyes followed the movement like he already knew how to track hope. I kissed his forehead, the skin soft as paper promises, and whispered, Be smaller than your fear, bigger than their noise. The courthouse buzzed like a beehive. Reporters in crisp suits swarmed the steps, all hungry for an angle. Alvarez met me by the security gate. Don't talk to anyone, she warned. Just tell the truth. That's all I have left, I said. She smiled without humor. Then it'll be enough. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and cold air. Sienna sat between her lawyers, hair restored to its golden armor, wrists bare now that the cuffs were gone. She looked thinner, but not remorseful. Some people lose everything and still manage to look entitled. I took my seat behind the prosecution table, the brass key cold against my chest under the navy dress. When called to the stand, I swore in again. The prosecutor asked the same questions, but now the weight was public. Describe the night you found the infant. Describe your relationship to the defendant. Did you have reason to fear for your safety? My answers were plain, stripped to bone. Yes, once, no. Truth doesn't need embroidery. It only asks to be spoken without trembling. Then came Sienna's defense attorney. Sharp suit, smug smile. Ms. Carter, you've admitted you were under great emotional distress following your son's tragic death, correct? Yes. Would it be fair to say grief may have affected your perception that evening? Grief affects memory, I said, not eyesight. A ripple of murmurs crossed the gallery. You're suggesting my client meant harm? He pressed. She admitted as much, I replied. Your client called me that night and told me to bring the baby. Do you call that mercy? He blinked, losing his rhythm. Phone records confirm that? Ask Detective Alvarez. Sienna's gaze flicked toward me, sharp as broken glass. For a second, we were the only two people in the room. The woman who birthed the child into betrayal, and the woman who refused to let him sink. I felt no triumph, only gravity. Decision beat. I broke the stare first. When I stepped down, Alvarez caught my arm. "You cut clean," she said quietly. "That's how truth should sound." "Truth doesn't sound clean," I said. "It just stops bleeding sooner." Outside, the sky threatened rain but held back. Reporters shouted questions. I ignored them all. Mrs. Chen waited in her car, waving like a small lighthouse. "Let's go home," she said. "Soup's still warm." On the drive, the courthouse shrank in the rearview mirror until it looked like a box someone forgot to close. Eli was asleep when we arrived. His breathing filled the house like a small hymn. I sank into the rocking chair, the motion pulling me back into rhythm. Reflection. We spend half our lives trying to prove we are still useful, when all the proof we need is the warmth of another heartbeat against ours. The world measures women by what they finish. I've started again instead. How long before forgiveness stops feeling like surrender? I carried Eli to the window. The lake shimmered under the thin moonlight, no longer menacing, just wide and indifferent. I thought about the women who came before me, my mother, her mother. Each one taught to stay quiet, to keep the peace. I pressed my palm to the glass, feeling the cool match my pulse. "Not anymore," I whispered. Eli stirred, sighed, then settled back to sleep. When the wind shifted, the chimes Daniel had hung years ago began to sing, a soft metallic hymn that trembled through the air. I closed my eyes and let it wash over us. The brass key rested against my collarbone, warm now, as if carrying its own memory of touch. I held Eli a little closer, rocking slowly until the night itself seemed to breathe with us. Tomorrow would bring verdicts and headlines. Tonight, all that mattered was this: a child who would never know the weight of the water, and a woman who finally stopped mistaking survival for waiting. Rain began before dawn, thin and steady, the kind that sounds like a whisper repeating itself until you listen. I stood at the window, holding Eli while the lake blurred behind the veil of gray. Somewhere in that sound was peace, but I wasn't ready to claim it yet. His small hand found the chain around my neck, fingers brushing the brass key as if testing its story. I smiled. "That opens more than doors," I told him. By 8, the phone rang. Alvarez again. "Verdict's in," she said. "Guilty on all counts. Murder in the 2nd degree. Attempted infanticide. Sentencing next month." Her tone was steady, but I heard the fatigue beneath. "It's over, Miriam." "Nothing that starts in blood is ever over," I replied. She didn't argue. "You should still hear it said out loud," she insisted. "You were right." I closed my eyes and let the words settle where disbelief used to live. "Thank you," I whispered. After we hung up, I placed Eli back in his crib. He blinked once, the slow, deliberate kind of look that babies give when they're not sleeping, but deciding whether to trust the world. I ran my thumb along his temple and thought of Daniel, the same calm forehead, the same faint swirl of hair. I wanted to believe my son could see this, that somewhere he knew the story had found its ending. But endings never come clean. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Chen arrived unannounced, arms full of laundry and unsolicited advice. "You need air," she said. "Fresh air makes better mothers." "I'm not sure what kind of mother I am," I said. "The alive kind," she answered. She helped me bundle Eli, wrapped him in a blue blanket, and we walked down to the lake. The water smelled of rain and old forgiveness. We stood at the edge, the same spot where I'd waded in weeks ago. The mud had dried, the tracks gone. I took the brass key from around my neck and held it over the water, its weight balanced between memory and release. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you can rest now." Then I kissed the metal once and tucked it into my pocket instead of throwing it. Some things you don't surrender. You pass them on when the time is right. Decision beat. I chose to keep it. As we turned to leave, Mrs. Chen asked, Will you testify at sentencing? No, I said. Let the system speak for itself. And you? I'll be busy living what comes next. That night, I lit a single candle on the kitchen table. No ceremony, just light enough to remind me I'd survived another version of myself. The house smelled faintly of chamomile and rain-soaked wood. Eli stirred once in the next room, the sound small but certain. Reflection. Survival isn't loud or cinematic. It's repetition. The next breath, the next meal, the next morning you choose not to disappear. I used to think invisibility was protection. Now I know it's just a quieter form of dying. What happens to a woman after the world finally believes her? I poured a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the candle's reflection tremble against the glass. Each flicker reminded me that peace isn't a gift, it's a practice. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the world clean and unashamed. I whispered to the dark, "We're still here." And for once, that was enough. The clock struck midnight. Eli murmured in his sleep, a small, hopeful sound that seemed to carry through the entire house. I took it as a sign, not of closure, but of continuity. The kind Daniel would have smiled at. The kind worth staying alive for. Mornings found their rhythm again. The kettle's whistle, Eli's small coos, the creak of the rocker, all ordinary notes in a song I'd forgotten I knew. I moved slower now, but with purpose. Every action, warming a bottle, folding a blanket, opening the curtains, felt like a conversation between who I was and who I'd become. The world outside still remembered the scandal. Once a week, a reporter would knock, polite but hungry. I'd open the door just enough to say, "No comment," and close it before curiosity could find a foothold. Alvarez called once to say the media had shifted to a newer tragedy. "You're free," she said. "They've moved on." "They always do," I answered, "but I'm not sure I want to." Silence followed, the kind that means respect. Decision beat. That afternoon, I called Keisha. "I'm ready to make the adoption permanent," I said. "No more temporary anything." She paused before replying, maybe surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Then I'll start the paperwork," she said. "You've already proven everything that matters." Eli learned to smile that week. Real, deliberate smiles, not the dreamy ones newborns give to no one. He smiled when I hummed, when sunlight hit the wall, when I whispered his name. Each grin carved away a little more of the fear I'd been storing like canned food. The house changed with him. The clock ticked softer. The air smelled less like lemon oil and more like milk and sleep. Mrs. Chen helped me rearrange the guest room. "Babies grow faster than guilt," she said, hammering a nail for a new picture frame. Inside it, I placed a photograph of Daniel holding a fishing pole at 15, grinning with crooked pride. "He would have been a good father," I murmured. "Now you get to be both," she said. I didn't argue. One night, after Eli finally slept, I took out a box I hadn't touched since Daniel's funeral. Inside were the fragments of his life: college ID, theater tickets, a letter he'd written me on my 60th birthday. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and old ink. "You taught me that being kind doesn't mean being small," he'd written. I traced the words with my fingertip, the same hand that had pulled his son from water. I could almost hear his laugh again, unhurried, unguarded. The phone rang, startling me. Alvarez, her voice softer than usual. "Just thought you'd want to know. Sienna's sentence came in." Life without parole. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you." "You don't sound relieved." "Justice isn't relief," I said. "It's maintenance." "You always did talk like a teacher," she replied, and I could hear her smiling. After the call, I stepped out onto the porch. The lake shimmered silver under a waning moon, calm as glass. Reflection. Peace doesn't arrive because the world changes. It comes when you stop asking it to. I've spent a lifetime trying to be enough for everyone else. Now I just want to be present for the small life breathing down the hall. What does it mean to outlive your grief without betraying it? The wind rose, carrying the scent of wet leaves. Somewhere down the street, a train sounded its long, low horn. I thought of that first night, the sirens, the chaos, the unthinkable weight of the suitcase, and realized I hadn't stepped near the lake since. Decision beat. Tomorrow, I would. Not to revisit pain, but to give it back to the water and walk away lighter. I finished the tea I'd forgotten to drink and watched dawn crawl over the horizon. The first light hit the brass key hanging from its chain, throwing a sliver of gold across the table. I lifted it once more, feeling its familiar coolness. It used to unlock Daniel's door. Now it reminded me that some doors you have to build yourself. I turned it in my fingers and whispered, "We're almost home, love. Just a few more turns." The morning I returned to the lake, the air carried that crisp edge only early spring can manage. Half promise, half warning. I left the house before sunrise, wrapped Eli in his blanket, and drove the short road I'd once run barefoot in terror. The dirt had hardened, the weeds along the shoulder grown taller. The world, indifferent, had moved on, but grief has a long memory. It waits in the soil. When I reached the water's edge, fog hovered just above the surface, thin as breath. The ripples caught pale light, each one vanishing before I could name it. I stood there for a long time, holding my grandson close, listening to the small rhythm of his breathing against my chest. That sound had become my anchor, the proof that life can pulse inside what once was death. I sat on a flat rock and let the silence speak. "This is where it started," I whispered, though the lake already knew. The brass key rested in my palm, warm from my skin. I'd thought about throwing it that day, about letting the water keep it. But now, it felt less like closure and more like cowardice. Some things you keep, not to remember the pain, but to honor the survival. A duck startled nearby, wings slicing the air. Eli jerked in my arms, then relaxed. I smiled. "You're safe," I told him. "You're safe because we didn't look away." Decision beat, I took the key, tied it to a small blue ribbon, and looped it around his wrist for a moment, just long enough for its metal to touch his skin. "One day you'll ask," I said, "and I'll tell you everything." Then I tucked it back under my collar. Not yet. When I turned to leave, I caught sight of a single maple leaf floating on the water, red even in spring. It shouldn't have been there. Wrong season, wrong color, but there it was, stubborn and vivid. Reflection. Maybe healing doesn't follow time's rules. Maybe it shows up out of order, like a leaf that refuses to wait for autumn. On the way home, the radio hummed low. News about other people's tragedies, other verdicts. The world kept bleeding, but I had my small island of calm in the back seat. At a stoplight, Eli opened his eyes. For a heartbeat, his gaze found mine in the rearview mirror, steady, unblinking. How does a child who's seen nothing yet look like he already understands everything? Back home, the day unfolded gently. Mrs. Chen dropped off soup. Alvarez texted a single word, closure. I replied, continuance. She sent back a heart. The house smelled of onions and ginger. I laid Eli on his blanket, let him kick and coo while sunlight moved across the floorboards. When night came, I found myself humming without realizing it. The tune was old, one my mother used to sing while hanging laundry, but the words had changed over the years, worn smooth by time and necessity. I looked at Eli, at his hands curling toward sleep, and thought of all the women who had carried love like this through storms they never chose. Decision beat. I wrote his full name in the family Bible, Eli Daniel Carter, and pressed the page flat. It was a small, quiet act, but it felt like building something solid after years of collapse. Reflection. I used to believe age made me invisible, but perhaps invisibility is freedom, the space to do what matters without applause. The candle burned low beside me. The lake was a memory now, not a wound. Tomorrow, I'd begin the paperwork to make Eli legally mine. Tonight, I would simply hold him until the house filled with morning again. And in that stillness, with the brass key warm against my skin, I whispered, "We made it, my love. We're still here." Spring folded quietly into summer, and with it, the weight in my chest softened from stone to memory. Eli learned to crawl first, then stand. Every milestone carried its own disbelief, each wobble proof that something I'd saved was learning how to save itself. I spent my mornings barefoot on the kitchen tile, coffee cooling between my hands, watching him pull himself up by the edge of the table. His laughter filled the house like sunlight that didn't ask permission to enter. Decision beat. I started teaching again, part-time at the local community center, reading workshops for adults who'd never finished school. It wasn't the classroom I used to have, but it was enough. Each lesson reminded me that growth doesn't belong only to the young. When one of my students, a 68-year-old man named Carl, read his first full paragraph aloud, I felt a strange echo of the night I pulled Eli from the lake. The same pulse of fragile, improbable life resurfacing where silence had lived. Mrs. Chen still came every Friday. She'd bring oranges, gossip, and unsolicited philosophy. "You know, grief is like soup," she said one afternoon, peeling an orange at my counter. "It gets thicker when you stir it too much." I laughed. "Then I've been stirring for years." "Time to eat it," she said, handing me a slice. We sat in companionable quiet, the air smelling faintly of citrus and detergent. One evening, Alvarez stopped by unannounced. She wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a gray sweater. "Thought I'd check in," she said. "No work, no interviews, just human company." She brought a small paper bag. Inside was a snow globe of a lake, tiny and calm. "For when you need to remember without drowning." I turned it over, watched the white flakes swirl. "You have no idea what this means," I said. "I think I do," she replied. Reflection. Age teaches you that peace isn't earned through victory, but through permission. To rest, to forgive, to stop rehearsing pain. I used to think healing meant forgetting. Now I know it means remembering without flinching. What happens when the purpose that kept you alive starts to feel complete? That night, Eli fell asleep on my lap, his weight heavier now, but still molding perfectly to my chest. Outside, the first fireflies blinked across the yard, slow and certain. I leaned back, the rocker creaking beneath me, and thought of Daniel. He'd be 35 this year. I wondered what kind of father he would have been. Strict, soft, probably both. I whispered into the quiet. "He's safe, love. You can rest now." Decision beat. The next morning, I went to the courthouse to finalize the adoption. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, slid a document across the counter. "Sign here, Ms. Carter. This makes it official." My pen didn't shake this time. When I handed the papers back, she smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Mom." The word hit differently than I expected. Heavier, deeper. It wasn't just title. It was covenant. That night, we celebrated in our own way. Mrs. Chen brought noodles. Alvarez brought wine. I lit a candle and placed it beside Daniel's photograph. "To beginnings that don't look like beginnings," I said. We clinked glasses. The brass key lay on the table between the plates, catching the candlelight. Unchanged, but no longer heavy. Eli reached for it, his fingers brushing the metal before I could move it away. "No," Mrs. Chen smiled. "Let him." "He's claiming his inheritance," she was right. Some legacies aren't money or land. They're endurance passed hand to hand, heartbeat to heartbeat. When everyone left and the house quieted again, I sat in the dark, tracing the key's outline against my palm. Reflection. Maybe survival isn't about being spared. It's about being chosen to carry the story forward. The window was open. A cool breeze brushed through, stirring the curtains. Somewhere beyond the darkness, the lake glimmered faintly, indifferent and eternal. I took one long breath, feeling both small and infinite, and whispered, "Tomorrow we start again." August arrived in its slow golden way. The air grew heavy with sweetness, the kind that clings to skin and memory alike. Eli was walking now, unsteady but determined, his small fists clenched like he was holding invisible courage. Each step echoed through the house as if declaring, "I made it." I rearranged my life around his rhythm. Mornings began with oatmeal and sunlight on the floor. Nights ended with lullabies and quiet prayers I never believed in until I had to. My body ached in new ways, but I welcomed every sore muscle like proof I was still needed. Reflection. At 63, purpose is a second wind. It doesn't blow hard, it just stays long enough for you to keep moving. The adoption certificate came in the mail that week. A single sheet, heavy paper, government seal embossed at the bottom. Eli Daniel Carter, legal guardian, Miriam Carter. I traced the words with my thumb, the way I used to trace Daniel's name on his school forms. The weight of ink felt identical to the weight of love. Simple, irreversible. Decision beat. I drove to the cemetery for the first time since the trial. The grass was taller than before, summer green and wild. Daniel's stone had weathered around the edges. I knelt, pressed the certificate against it. "He's yours," I said softly. "But he's mine to keep safe." Eli toddled beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder for balance. "Hi, Daddy," he said in his small, careful voice. The sound cracked something open inside me that I didn't know was still sealed. On the way home, the car smelled faintly of rain and baby powder. The radio hummed a tune I half remembered from years ago, something Daniel used to whistle when fixing the porch light. Eli babbled along, his voice weaving through the melody like a promise. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, not from fear but from awe. How fragile and vast life becomes when it gives you a second chance. That evening, Alvarez called. "We're closing the file," she said. "All evidence archived." Her voice carried relief, but also emptiness. "You did more than survive, Miriam. Restored something." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I just refused to let the water win." She was quiet for a beat. "Either way, you changed the ending." After dinner, I bathed Eli and set him in his crib. The room smelled of lavender soap and warm skin. The moonlight spilled across the wooden floor, soft as breath. I stood there longer than necessary, just watching him breathe. How many nights had I stood in hospitals, afraid that sound would stop? Reflection. We call it motherhood, but it's really a slow act of resurrection. Ours, not theirs. Outside, the wind stirred through the trees. A loose shutter clinked against the siding, rhythmic and steady. The brass key hung on the wall now, framed beside Daniel's photograph. I'd polished it once, then stopped. It didn't need to shine. It needed to endure. What do you hold on to when everything you've loved has already changed form? Decision beat. I picked up the phone and dialed Mrs. Chen. "I'm thinking of selling the house," I said. "Start fresh somewhere quieter." She gasped, then laughed. "You finally ready to stop guarding ghosts?" "Maybe it's time." "You'll know," she said. "The moment you close that door, if you don't hear them following, it means they've let you go." Later that night, I sat by the window with tea gone cold. The stars blurred at the edges. I whispered Daniel's name once, not to summon him, but to thank him. The house was silent, except for Eli's breathing and the faint hum of crickets outside. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the quiet do what words never could. Fold the past into something softer, something almost kind. The lake waited somewhere beyond the dark, no longer an enemy, just another piece of the world still turning. The house was emptier than it had ever been, yet somehow lighter. I'd started sorting through rooms, filling boxes with what no longer needed to be carried forward. Daniel's trophies, the china I never used, the faded drapes that still smelled faintly of lemon polish. Mrs. Chen helped me label everything. "Keep, donate, remember," she said, stacking boxes like chapters. "You can't move until the past fits in one hand." Eli followed us from room to room, dragging a wooden truck by its string, humming to himself. His laughter echoed down the hall where grief used to live. Reflection. Children don't heal us. They remind us how to live without permission. Decision beat. That afternoon, I called the realtor. "List it," I said. "I'm ready." The woman on the other end sounded surprised. "You've been here how long?" 37 years. "Then this isn't just a sale," she said. "It's a surrender." "No," I replied. "It's an exchange." By evening, the lake wind pushed through the open windows, fluttering the curtains like slow applause. I found the brass key on the mantel, touched its cool edge. For years, it had been a symbol of loss, then survival. Now it felt like transition. I slipped it into my pocket without thinking. Some things are meant to move with you. A week later, Alvarez stopped by one last time. She was off duty, hair loose, a paper bag of pastries in her hand. "You really leaving?" she asked, glancing around the half-empty living room. "The world's bigger than this view," I said. "And smaller, too, once you stop being afraid of it." She smiled. "You've got my number. If you ever need anything." "I'll call," I promised. We sat on the porch steps, drinking weak coffee and sharing silence that didn't need filling. "You ever think about retiring?" I asked. "Every day," she said. "But some cases leave pieces of you behind. You're one of mine." The honesty in her voice caught me off guard. "Then come visit," I said. "Bring your ghosts. We'll feed them soup." She laughed, and for a moment, the years between us disappeared. That night, after Eli fell asleep, I walked through each room one last time. The house hummed with its familiar sounds, the groan of pipes, the whisper of the floorboards. But none of it asked me to stay. In Daniel's old room, I paused by the window. The moon reflected on the lake, calm and unthreatening. I remembered the first night I had run toward it, the cold, the weight, the terrible hope. Now, the water looked harmless, almost kind. Reflection. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means refusing to carry their shadows where light still wants to live. What does freedom sound like when it finally stops whispering and starts breathing? Decision beat. I took the last box to the car, set it gently in the trunk, then returned inside for one final object. The photograph. Daniel holding Eli in the hospital, my hand on the baby's back. I traced their faces, then placed it on the passenger seat. "We're going," I said out loud, to both of them and to myself. Outside, the night air was clean. The crickets played their steady chorus. The house behind me glowed faintly, each window like an eye learning how to close. I locked the front door, slid the brass key into my pocket, and turned toward the car. For a moment, I stood still, listening to everything I was leaving and everything that was waiting ahead. Then I opened the door, started the engine, and drove into the dark, where the road curved towards somewhere quieter, somewhere unpromised, somewhere mine. The highway stretched before me like a ribbon pulled tight by unseen hands. Dawn hadn't yet broken, but the horizon held a pale shimmer, a quiet suggestion that morning was on its way. Eli slept in his car seat, his small head tilted toward the window, one fist clutching the corner of his blanket. His breathing was even, soft and sure, the rhythm that had kept me alive these past months. I drove in silence. The radio stayed off. I'd had enough of other people's stories. The world outside passed in muted colors, fields, fences, glimpses of distant rooftops. And I felt something I hadn't known in years, stillness that didn't feel like waiting. Reflection. When you survive long enough, peace stops being a destination. It becomes a habit you practice until it feels like breathing. Decision beat. I pulled off at a rest stop near the river, the kind with cracked picnic tables and a vending machine that hadn't worked in decades. The air smelled faintly of wet grass and engine oil. I stepped out, stretched, then opened the back door. Eli stirred, blinking up at me as though waking into a world he'd already claimed. "Almost there," I whispered, though I had no map, no town chosen, just a direction. Forward. There was a small overlook nearby, a wooden fence half rotted with age. I carried him there. The river moved slow and steady beneath us, brown from rain, endless in its patience. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the brass key. It had grown warm from the drive, the metal smooth from years of touch. For a long moment, I turned it over in my palm, feeling its weight change with memory. "This belonged to your grandfather," I told Eli softly. "It opened the garage, the place where your father built things he didn't finish." The baby blinked, studying the glint of gold in the early light. "It used to mean what was locked away," I continued. "Now it means what's been kept alive." Reflection. Love at my age isn't grand or loud. It's practical. A hand steadying a smaller hand. A breath counted before dawn. A key held, not to open doors, but to remind you that you still can. What do we become once the fight is finally over? Decision beat. I didn't throw the key this time. I pressed it into Eli's tiny palm, just long enough for the metal to touch skin, then tucked it back against my heart. "When you're ready," I whispered, "you'll decide what it opens next." We stood there until the first sunlight spilled across the river, gold melting into the water's surface. The warmth reached our faces, soft and unassuming. For once, I didn't think of the lake, or the house, or the trial. I thought only of breath, the kind you take when you finally earned it. Eli yawned, then smiled that sleepy, open-mouthed smile that can undo entire histories. I kissed his forehead and laughed quietly, the sound surprising even me. Behind us, the car waited, doors open to the morning. I walked back slowly, each step lighter than the last. The road shimmered ahead, not with promise, but with permission. When I settled into the driver's seat, I didn't check the mirror. The past had already folded itself neatly behind me. Reflection. I used to think survival was about holding on, but maybe it's about knowing when to drive away without looking back. The brass key rested warm against my chest, steady as a heartbeat. I turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life, quiet and certain. As the road opened before us, Eli reached out a hand toward the light slanting through the windshield, and I let the moment last. No destination, no fear, just motion, just grace. Outside, the first birds began to sing. I whispered to the wind, "We're home." Then I drove on, following the line of the horizon until it disappeared into the day.